You're listening to the Payments Perspective podcast, where we help you navigate your payments journey one episode at a time. WestPay supports over 800 members, from financial institutions to fintechs, through expert education, guidance, and over 50 years of payments expertise. Let's dive in.
Hey, welcome back to the Payments Perspective podcast by WestPay. My name's Jim Petkovits, Vice President of Education Events, and today I am pleased to be joined by Kimberly Mantuano, Director of Product and Solutions at Finboa. And today we're going to be discussing one of the most challenging and closely scrutinized areas of compliance for financial institutions. I know it's one of those things that we probably get half of our phone calls involved, and is conducting a thorough Reg E investigation. A well-executed investigation not only is going to help your financial institution meet regulatory requirements, but is also going to protect consumers, reduce risk, and demonstrate compliance during examinations. Today, we explore practical tips for building a consistent, defensible investigation and discuss what examiners expect to see when they review your institution's procedures and documentations. Kimberly, first, welcome to the podcast. And before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe a little bit about Finboa?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Kimberly Mantuano. I have a few decades of experience in finance, working for a lot of large financial institutions and working for some large financial service providers in the industry. And one of the things that I've done for about 10 years of time at a large financial institution was to manage disputes, cards, any electronic funds transfer platforms. And in my role at Finboa, I've been managing the payment disputes product. As a result of my experience with that large financial institution, I've been able to learn a lot about card network, ACH network, real-time payments networks, and how dispute tracking can be most effective for Reg E and other types, but Reg E is predominant. So that's my history, and I'm glad to be here.
Reg E is one of those areas we get dozens of phone calls a day on our payments hotline asking about what to do and how to make sure that they're following all the rules and requirements. So for institutions, why is it so important to have such a strong investigation process?
A few main things I think about is that regulatory exposure, being non-compliant is a big problem. And when you don't follow Reg E's process, you end up with a consent order and some type of action against your financial institution. So I would say regulatory exposure is the biggest problem. If you don't have a tight system and a tight process to follow, you could be in some trouble. Also, fraud losses is a big topic for most institutions. How do you have an effective Reg E investigation and also somehow prevent having excessive fraud losses? When you have a good investigation process, that creates the really strong backbone to your denial. So if you have a consumer that exercises their right to the documentation, if your investigation was well documented, you have all the defense you need to say, oh, here's how that went.
I think that's really common. Our members will call up and it'll sound like seems like there's very little claim that the customer would have, that maybe they authorized a specific transaction, maybe are dissatisfied with the products, which wouldn't be necessarily a Reg E claim or dispute, or certainly not an unauthorized EFT transaction by Reg E's definition. But they're like, oh, so we can just deny the claim. And we always try to remind them, you can't deny the claim. You must investigate the claim and have a finding of no error found, but you've got to do something and document something that you've done, because your regulators aren't going to want to hear you say, oh, we just turn them away, because that's not going to be acceptable. Like you said, you can get in lots of trouble for claiming that there's no investigation when their proper response might be more like no error found, but is still important for an investigation. I think one of the other things that you mentioned is FedNow, RTP, cards, ACH, you talked about ATMs. So Reg E investigations also often involve multiple departments. So what would a financial institution need to ensure for consistency across those departments and make sure those policies and procedures are followed by everyone that might be in different siloed departments?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's very common that each of those departments has their own process and their own procedure to handle a payment dispute. But when it's a Reg E covered dispute, it's more ideal to have a centralized payment dispute tracking system. And what that does is it allows a single document, policy, procedure, process for your internal auditors, your internal compliance department, and external examiner so that they can come into one system and say, oh, thank goodness they know how to handle their things. In addition, when you have certain team members that their role is just intake, that's all they do. And then there's a totally different person that does the investigation and has to live up to maybe the Reg E process. When you have disparate systems, maybe an intaker fills out a form and leaves it on their desk, but then forgot to give it to the other department, or maybe you're keeping track of it on a spreadsheet, or your frontline person was just getting ready to go to lunch and then they forgot to call somebody back. So if you have an intake process that your intaker can fill out the same type of form, the same type of process to actually capture the claim, then the back office, every separate department can have the same back office experience. So standardizing that across all of your departments makes it easy just from a tracking perspective. But then like a second layer on top of that, if you're a financial institution that requires a first line of defense, that first line of defense can do their job much faster, whether it's day 2 quality control or whether it's a random sampling of quality assurance over closed disputes over the past month. Then that department has a much easier job because they're following the same process for every single payment type that is happening. And if your leadership is asking each department separately for a report that says, oh, how are you handling your Reg E claims? Are we in trouble? Are we at risk? Are there any findings? If it's all from one system, then that would help make sure all departments are treating Reg E claims or even non-Reg E claims identically.
I think that's a really great point because your frontline staff, in particular those intake folks, Reg E is probably one of many things that they're dealing with on a daily basis. And then when you compile a Reg E investigation, which is going to have universal applications against all the different payment channels you mentioned, plus the fact that each one of them probably will handle a dispute differently. I mean, just ACH to cards, you've got chargebacks versus an unauthorized EFT. For that frontline staff to keep 5 different procedures for 5 different areas separate and figure out how to handle each Reg E dispute from an intake perspective is going to be next to impossible in that respect. But at least if you have a universal way of bringing it in, and then the different investigations may be handled by different individuals, but you have one universal hub where everything can be done. Because if it's not documented, it didn't happen for an auditor. So being able to produce something that says this is what we do and this is how we handle it. And then unfortunately, in worst case scenarios, when one consumer is a victim of identity theft, they could be impacted by multiple different areas of disputes. And the worst thing you want to do with a customer in that situation is pass them around with 5 different departments trying to handle 5 different disputes for 5 different payment systems and then expect them to get one solution where you can handle it in one universal place and look at everything.
Yeah, to add to that, I think Reg E even requires that you make it easy for your consumer to understand the dispute process. So in that example you gave, if each department has a different way of communicating about the error and how it was handled, Reg E actually would call attention to that as a finding as well. So it's a good point.
Certainly, because like you mentioned, if you miss in the 10 days notification and provisional credit and follow-up notifications, all the things that have to get done, all those places, and instead of having one place that's keeping track of all of that, you've got 5, 6, 7, 8 people tracking the same thing, and some are reporting and maybe one misses something or one doesn't investigate completely, and it could make it tough. So what are some of those key elements of a Reg E unauthorized EFT investigation? What would you say is like the first place to start for a financial institution?
The minimal is follow the procedure, follow Reg E procedures to the T. Basically, prompt accurate intake, which we've already kind of talked about. Make sure that intaker gets all the information that you need to start an effective investigation. So if you don't know if the card's in possession, or if you don't know, was it unauthorized, but I authorized it before? Did I revoke my authorization? Knowing those details right away when the error is being reported is really helpful to that back office person. Timely provisional credit, if the system that you're using doesn't allow that, there are systems out there to help you. But being able to hit the 10-day time frame or 20 days if it's a new account, knowing you did it, follow that procedure to the letter. If the notice has to be sent in 1 day, send it. If it has to be sent in 3 days, send it. If you have to make an adjustment in 1 day or 3 days, you have to do it. You can't miss it. Just follow the procedure to the T. reversing provisional credit, have to follow that to the T also. Make sure that nothing happens to that consumer within the 5 business days. So all of those very annoying, tedious procedure processes, follow them. So that's the highest of all things, follow
Yeah.
the procedure. And that's why there's systems like Finboa or others in the market that actually do that. So I would also say that defining that repeatable process that you've already mentioned, that to me is imperative. So if you have a process that's repeatable that says, what does a good investigation look like? How much research do I need to do? How much do I need to document that research? But having a procedure that says exactly what things you look at to determine, did the account holder participate? Did they benefit from it? How do I protect them when I'm working with a merchant or ODFI to get their money back? And then lastly, if your system doesn't have an audit trail of every single event, proving you did it on time, proving money moved when it was supposed to, proving that the letter's there, that they received it, that's super key to a successful investigation.
Tedious and difficult aspects of Reg E. We love Reg E at WestPay. We love to talk about it. Members help them through issues with Reg E, but there are parts of it that are tedious and difficult. And that kind of it brings up to the next point. What are some of those common mistakes or obstacles that undermine an otherwise good investigation?
Something I hear about the most is not knowing what's actually covered by Reg E. I think there's a misconception in the market that if it's a card dispute, it's covered by Reg E, but if it's not a card, it's not covered by Reg E. And that's just not true. If it's an electronic funds transfer, it's covered by Reg E. So there are very specific error types Reg E covers in those electronic funds transfers. Most of them are covered. And that means an ACH claim. It doesn't matter if you have return rights or if you don't have return rights, it's covered. If you have a Zelle payment, bill pay payment, those are electronic funds transfers. They were initiated online and therefore they're covered by Reg E. So when you're looking at Reg E things, the transaction's covered. Now, of course, there are some things left out, but I think one of the misunderstood types is if it's paid by other means, but it's electronic. If it's an incorrect amount, it's covered by Reg E and has to follow the procedure. So I'd say that's probably a really big one. One of the other common mistakes that I think is unfortunate is that if your consumer has not notified you within the 60-day statement time frame, there's a common denial to deny as if it's not covered because they didn't notify you within 60 days. And that's completely incorrect. A consumer can submit an electronic funds transfer dispute from years ago. You have to take that claim and investigate it. But what Reg E says you don't have to do is follow the procedure itself. Investigation you must follow, but you don't have to give provisional credit as an example within that 10 days. And then common mistake, you mentioned earlier, the siloed systems across different departments. I think it's a really common mistake that an institution doesn't find a trainable solution for intakers so that you're always doing the same process every time. Super big obstacle. But if you have an easily trained system of collecting disputes, that's going to save you. And I know we talked about it already, but it's a big obstacle. I think that when clients actually implement Finboa, we find that it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that it's all the same across all these things. And it was like, if you can shop online, you can use this dispute tracking system type of thing. So.
I love each one of those things that you brought up. The past 60-day dispute and immediate denial is one that we hear from our members, unfortunately, a lot. And I'm glad you're dispelling that myth because Reg E doesn't talk about any of that at all in any way. And the unfortunate circumstances of someone intaking a dispute and making a claim that something's not disputable or that there's no valid claim, and then a valid claim gets denied because it's not followed up on. I just think those are huge ones. And everything you mentioned, I would agree with you. We mentioned this, but what kind of documents or other types of forms would you think are really important to make sure you can prove you're compliant with a Reg E dispute?
Your audit trail of a claim should have a date and a timestamp on it. Some clients, I think, miss that. A lot of financial institutions are still using spreadsheets, which when you're smaller, maybe that works for you. But you have to have a date and a time that says, when was that error reported to me? It should be in a system that you can't go back and edit it later because you made a mistake. It should be something that system tracks that for the consumer's protection. Tracking every single piece of that claim. Did you hit the original 10-day or 20-day time frame? Did you meet it? That audit trail should be tracking every single thing about that. Every document that was collected, so the form that was filled out, whether it was a WSIT or whether it's a questionnaire that, about a car dispute or a Zell dispute or anything, that form needs to be saved with that claim. And every notice you sent to that person has to be included in that claim. So having a system where you have a repository that stores all of the audit trail, all the documentation, all the record of money movement. You don't have to have the record of money movement necessarily with the claim itself, but it helps the auditor know when did I look at statements from a year ago. And then I would say the training, documentation, and procedures. So every institution is required to train everybody on Reg E error resolution that matters in their role. You should have that tracked from a documentation perspective. Your auditor or examiners too are going to ask you for your procedures. So if you don't have your repeatable procedures, or maybe it's a procedural policy for how you handle Reg E claims, you should make one.
It, it sounds like you're saying the same things we try and tell our members. If it's not written down, it doesn't exist, would be the first thing I would say as an auditor. And if you can't prove you're doing and following all those things, and there's so many different time frames and so many different documents to keep track of that in a spreadsheet, even if you're a small institution, is going to be extraordinarily difficult. On that topic, are there any other red flags that you recommend financial institutions avoid for their Reg E investigations?
Something we haven't really focused on so far is failing to provide the required documentation. So if you have a consumer that's unsatisfied with your decision, you have to offer them the option to ask you for that documentation that you use to make that final determination. It's a very common thing to forget. You have to actually say to them in a notice, you have the right to ask for this. And then I know we mentioned a tiny bit about denying already, but I mean, these are huge red flags. If you deny a claim because the account holder didn't give you any supporting documentation, this is a big deal. So if you have an incorrect amount claim, as an example, and you're expecting them to provide you with a receipt, it's a card transaction and you are required to send a receipt to Visa or MasterCard or Discover, whichever brand you have. You're asking them for a receipt when they don't give you one. Some clients are denying them for just the fact that you can give documentation for it. Unfortunately, Reg E doesn't put the onus on the consumer to have to provide you with a receipt. So if you're going to deny it, it's not to say that you wouldn't have authority to deny it. It's that the investigation has to prove that the account holder actually participated in that transaction. As an example, was the transaction authorized for the amount that actually posted? Do you have all of the data elements that say that that transaction was actually performed by that consumer? And you deny because there was no error found, I think you mentioned earlier. I would say two other big red flags that come up all the time is fees that are associated with a disputed transaction and interest credit that wasn't actually paid. So if they're on an account that has an interest dividend, that they're not handling that interest, or those maybe they had an insufficient funds fee or an overdraft fee, and it was as a result of one of the disputed transactions in their claim. Or if they were had disputed items and they were out that money for a period of time before you gave them credit, you have to shore up that consumer. Even a penny is considered a very high risk harm to the consumer. So I think not having those things in your dispute tracking systems is a big red flag. Eventually, when an auditor looks at it, they'll call attention to it as a finding and something to solve.
Oh, Kimberly, I love everything you're saying here. This is just like
Yeah,
exactly what
so fun, right?
people need to hear. We brought you in because we know you know what you're talking about, but how does Finboa fit into this whole equation?
All the things that we've talked about today, Finboa actually handles those and other things. So as an example, to never miss a deadline, Finboa can automatically say, okay, well, when you get to day 10 and you haven't given provisional credit, we'll just issue it for you so that you don't miss it. If you hit a resolution deadline, you can set the system to go ahead and final credit that person so that you never miss that deadline. In automatic functions inside of a dispute system that can do that for you, where maybe you have a COVID scenario or a pandemic, right, where staff are out and you need your disputes to keep going because Reg E doesn't care. I would say that handling all of your payment dispute types inside of one platform where recovery, not just in cards, but recovery is also an option in connectivity. I think because we specialize in card processor integration for all of your card processors, but also making your ACH life easier for you. So Finboa has focused on being able to track your Reg E process and your recovery process, chargeback recovery, whatever it is, in the same claim, but without negatively impacting each other. So tracking your recovery separate of the Reg E process, but also having those things sort of intertwined with each other. We've made that very easy because we focus on it. It's something that's very important to us. Making that easy for our clients so that one system communicates with all of their systems in real time, brings back the information that they need into that claim, so they don't miss their deadline with Nacha. They don't miss their deadline with Cell. They don't miss their deadline with their card network because of recovery interferes with, well, I only have one person that does this job. They're focused on Reg E, and that's what I really care about. If I lose more money, oh well. We want financial institutions to be able to focus on all the things that are in their strategy.
I love it. The recovery piece is another one. We talked to this when our members in classes, and I bring up the commercials for the shingles vaccine. I'm going to go on vacation. Shingles doesn't care. It's like what we talk about with Reg E. It's like, what about my recovery? Reg E doesn't care. Reg E doesn't care about your recovery, but your recovery is a huge part for the financial institutions. Oh, Kimberly, this has been fun. I could talk for another 25 minutes if we wanted to. I could go all day, but I know you have other things to do. So I want to thank you for joining us today. If anyone would like to talk to Finboa, their contact information is going to be available in the description. Kimberly, do you have any closing thoughts before we end it out?
I'm excited for everybody that might benefit from this. If there are any comments, please leave them on the podcast.
We're going to put your contact information in the description so people can reach out to Finboa to get more about how you might be able to assist them. And of course, we want to thank everyone who's listening in today. If you're interested in becoming a WestPay member, you can visit our membership page in the link that's also in the description. And you can subscribe to the Payments Perspective podcast anywhere podcasts are available. We look forward to joining you next time as we continue to work together in shaping the future of payments. Kimberly, that was fun. We have to do that again.